I just wanted to say a few words about some work that we've been doing over the last 18 months looking at water resource long-term planning for the next 25 and 50 years. So Paul touched on it in his presentation, and I'm just going to give you a flavour of some of the findings for the report. So the context for the project, so we've been doing 25-year water resource management plans for many, many years. But actually what's changed is that 2012 we had a near miss. We're looking now at bringing drought planning together with the long-term water resource planning, and also looking at the potential for transfers between companies and how resilient would those be in the future. We've then been looking at drought resilience. So how resilient are we today? The impacts of droughts are significant and the risks are immediate. There are future challenges, so we need to reduce our abstractions to protect the environment, and I'll say a bit more about that. We've got growth. We've got 6 to 16 million new homes over the next, by 2040. Paul talked about 10 million over the next 40 years. The challenges of dealing with new housing is significant, particularly given that housing is in some of the driest regions of the country. And climate change, we need to be able to cope with that in the future. And what the report found is that we need to take a twin track approach. First and foremost, we need to think about demand management. Over the last 25 years, since privatisation in '89, we have managed to continue to supply customers, putting no more water into supply, even though we've had 25-30% more properties connected. And that's been delivered through reducing demand, through reducing leakage, and through businesses being more efficient. But also we need to look at supply side options as well. And improving resilience can be done at modest cost if done well. So the project started in October 2015. It came out of a request talking to the minister at the time, Rory Stewart, who was water minister, actually wanting to understand what's the evidence base, how resilient are we really, what are the gaps, and actually what could drought resilience look like over the next 50 years. And to assess the potential scale of those challenges and the potential options for dealing with it. And then what's the cost-benefit analysis, the trade-offs between cost, resilience, impact on customers, and what are the policy opportunities and risks. The work was carried out was overseen by a steering group, so Water UK and the water companies took a lead in that, but the steering group included the economic regulator, Ofwat, government, DEFRA, the Environment Agency, Drinking Water Inspectorate, and also the Welsh regulators, and it was independently peer reviewed. And how does it all fit together? Just very quickly, so we have water resource plans, we've got this, we've got the government giving advice to our economic regulator through policy statements and so on, and this picture just sets out how all those things fit together. So, key findings. Drought resilience. Droughts are real. What happens in a drought? So it starts off, level 2 up there is around temporary use bans. That's the new term for hosepipe bans. And it also restricts other users in terms of non-essential use. You go through more extreme restrictions in level 3, but at level 4, what happens there is that you have the emergency drought orders. So there's a significant impact on water customers. So it is potentially involving standpipes, rotor cuts. Agriculture can no longer abstract to irrigate their crops, and businesses can no longer use water other than for essential use. So the impacts are enormous. And the question is, how resilient are we? Well, we have had recent droughts, so Paul talked about the 76 drought. In 96, the drought in Yorkshire, I actually worked for Yorkshire Water at the time, and for a number of weeks, water was only kept supplied to Halifax, Huddersfield and Bradford, so it was the Pennine towns. You think it always rains, well it didn't for some months, and actually it was kept supplied by 600 tankers taking water down from Kielder, throwing it over the bridge on the M62 into Scamondon. That was the only way water was kept supplied. And in 2012 we had the near miss in the south and east where we'd had 2 dry winters. We put hosepipe bans into place. The day they came into operation, it started raining. Good idea. If you want, it's like a rain dance. If you want it to rain, put hosepipe bans in place. And it started raining, and it didn't stop raining, and we had the wettest summer ever on record. But if we'd had a moderate summer and then got into a third dry winter, then we would have been looking at those severe restrictions. And so we carried out an analysis that looks at both historic droughts, but also generating potential future droughts using modelling that's now available from the universities. And what it found on there is to assess the risk of those severe restrictions of rota cuts over the next 25 years. And so that's a problem now. It's not a climate change, it's just variability in the weather could result in these restrictions. Climate change is an additional risk on top of that, so we modelled the risks and the impacts of climate change. We didn't look at extreme scenarios, it looked at a median, sort of moderately drier climate and a dry climate, but at the sort of 75th percentile, if in technical terms. And what that found is that, for example, in the south and east, the risk of those drought restrictions trebles with the impact of climate change. And the UK Climate Change Risk Assessment that was published last year actually increased the risk assessment and the need for action around understanding and investing to be resilient to droughts. Protection of the aquatic environment is another area where we're looking at the impact that current abstractions have on the environment, and particularly this impacts in groundwater areas and where we have low-flowing rivers. And so we looked at 2 scenarios of a moderate reduction in abstraction and a more extreme. And it can be significant, and without labouring the numbers, if you looked at affinity water there, at the most extreme level, that's something like 50% of their water into supply. We don't expect it to be at that level, but that was the level that was modelled because there is some risk there. So in terms of the future needs, we've got the risk of climate change, we've got increase in demand from growth, and the need to find alternative resources to offset abstraction. And we looked at 3 different drought futures, and this just illustrates the risk, and it affects particularly the south and east. It's the driest, it's the fastest growing, it's low level, and so we can see significant impacts in those regions. And so we did an options appraisal. We looked at demand management first and centre, and I'll say a bit more about that. But having looked at the ability to reduce demand and what that might involve, then we also looked at the potential to transfer water between regions and also how resilient are those in the event of a drought. Because if you're in a drought in the south and east and you're relying on transfers from north or from the west, well, actually, what is the risk that they'll be in a drought at the same time? So, growth and demand management, which I think is particularly relevant in the middle of an Ecobuild conference. So future demand and population growth is one of the larger uncertainties. So the Office of National Statistics, the range is anything between 6 and 16 million new people, growth in the population over the next 25 years. There's then the question about how challenging can we be to ourselves and in working with customers and working with developers in terms of reducing both current demand and future demand associated with that growth. So the graphs there are showing the forecast PCC, so that's per capita consumption. So that's how many litres a day customers consume. And so even with business as usual, so these are things that we're already planning to do, so extending metering, working with customers to become more efficient, some behaviour change, there are some significant reductions expected in demand. And the question then is, how much further can we go? Can smart metering help in informing customers, in encouraging behaviour change? Will tariffs help, so with price signals? Can we retrofit existing properties to reduce less water? And new build, how much more efficient can new buildings become? And then can we go even further in that in terms of the enhanced demand management? And also to say that water companies are equally challenging themselves in driving down leakage. So we've had a 25% reduction in leakage over the last 10, 15 years. Can we go further? And we have to go further. But I've put on there some questions about sustainable new developments. So can we reduce the consumption of customers on new developments from 120 litres to 80 litres? And this isn't about saying it's your problem, that it's builders, that developers and house builders have to address this. How can water companies work to support developers, to help with additional costs? How can we put incentives in place in terms of reduced infrastructure charges where new developments are efficient? And can those efficiencies be put in place at a development level, not just at a household level? So can we look at recycling of effluent so that we're not flushing the toilet with drinking water? Can we have water efficient fittings and appliances? And can we do that without having to resort to regulation? Smart meters and behaviour change. What can be achieved by working with customers, by nudging them, by giving them better information? And can we work with customers and in the new non-household market where there are now independent retailers, can they work with business customers to reduce less? So, next steps. Companies will be using this evidence base to develop their next round of water resource management plans, which will be published at the back end of this year, beginning of next. Can we engage with customers on what is an appropriate level of resilience and what are the policy considerations in terms of demand management and also supply options for the future? Thank you.